Right. So, hey guys. So we're going to actually implement everything that we've been talking about so far, from all the React stuff, user effect stuff, APIs we've been talking about. So previously, what have we done so far? Well, from workshop 2, we got this cute little cat happiness page where whenever you click on this, you increment the cat happiness. So through here, we learn how to use components, we use how to manage state, we learn how to manage props. Also from lecture, we learned what exactly is an API? What is the structure of these HTTP requests? We went very briefly into asynchronous programming and how to get asynchronously and what are some possible bugs that we can run into. And we also went into the user effect hook and the life cycles. So in this workshop, we're actually going to start building Catbook, like the social media platform a bit. We're going to be able to retrieve and post and comment. And we're also going to be finally interacting with the API from the front end. We're going to be using both GET requests and POST requests. So we're going to build something that looks like that. There's going to be a little news story at the top and a submit button. And whenever you press submit, you're going to have your name to it. And you get to have some type of post that says something like, well, blabbing with Tony, and be able to post a comment and all that good stuff. So let's review front end and back end. So let's say that you're using the best browser available, and that is you. And you log into catbook.com. When you log into the catbook.com, there is the front end code, which is the code that is responsible for displaying everything that is currently in front of you. So this is made up of the React components you've been using, the HTML, the CSS. But let's say that you can't just stay with the static website and you actually want to interact with people. And maybe you want to make a post that says, I actually need some friends because I'm kind of handy. I need some friends. And so you post something to the backend, which is responsible for everything else, giving the information that you need, being able to post something, being able to retrieve all the posts. So we're going to do the backend tomorrow, and we're going to be focusing on the front end today. For the HTTP request, there are two main types. There are the GET request, which basically says, hey, backend, I need some new information. Can you please give me all the posts that you have? And the backend will respond, sure, of course, here are all the posts that you asked for. There's also something called the post request, which is used to update the database with some information. For example, hey, backend, I want to change this post, or I want to add a new post to all your posts. And the backend says, sure, but how exactly do we tell the backend what exactly we want to do? Well, on the backend sits API endpoints, which is basically little endpoints sitting on the backend with specification of what is the input parameters that they're expecting and what they expect you to give back. So for example, for the stories endpoint, it basically says, I'm going to ask the front end, I'm going to give you nothing. And the backend is going to give me all of the stories on Catbook back. So this is the specification for the story endpoint. For the story endpoint, which is a little confusing, but it's for posting a story, it says that I myself am going to make some type of script, some type of post, and I'm going to give it to the backend. And the backend says, I'm going to update my knowledge. I'm going to update all the posts that I have, and I'm going to give you some confirmation that says, I updated Catbook. So to review, we have get and post, we have get request to receive information when we're asking information, and the post request to give some type of information and update the database. Now, so for today, the backend is going to be a little black box because we wrote it for you guys. And we're going to be interacting with the front end of this workshop and creating these interactive API endpoints from our end, being able to interact with them. So briefly, here's the flow of a GET request and more specifics. So let's say Andy here. I'm going to say, Andy, I'm going to get some stories. And I'm going to, because I want stories, I'm going to say I want to go to the stories endpoint. So this is going to route all the way over there. Now, what the backend will give us is going to give us some JavaScript object of a story. For example, it's going to be some key value pair. The content will be something like, I really miss Andrew, create your name, me. And what the front end is responsible for is taking that JavaScript object that is actually not that pretty and turning it into something like that, an actual renderable post for us to use in JSX, React, HTML, CSS, all that fun stuff. So let's get started. Please, on your laptops, navigate to the Catbook React repository. Do git reset hard. Do git checkout W3 starter for the start of our workshop. And be sure to type npm install. If you have any questions, there is the general questions document. Our staff is really responsive on it, so we'll love that is such questions. And there's also the queue if you need individual help. So I'll give all of us a little moment to do this, so I'll do it myself. Okay, I think, are people getting ready to start the workshop? All right, okay, let's just start. So as an overview, we have a very similar folder structure from last time where we have cat happiness, the profile page down here, and everything starting in app.js. But we do have one new file called utilities.js. Utilities.js is right here on the code, and it basically has some wrapper helper functions at the staff row to be able to make API requests a little easier on our side. You don't exactly need to know all of the details on how they're written. You can always look at that later, but they basically simplify code for interacting with APIs. So recall that before, in our previous workshop, we have the overall app.js. And in app.js, we have a renderable navbar and a profile. And in profile, we have rendered a cat happiness component. What we're going to do now is all of this cool stuff, the actual feed and the social media website. So we're going to show how to create components for making new stories, for rendering new stories, for rendering the comments of the stories, for rendering single comments and posting new comments of the stories. So all of this is going to be after, I guess, today and tomorrow. So that's relatively what we're going for. If you see on that side, we're going to have new stories and everything cool that's rendered. So goals for today, the feed page, the ability to see other people's posts and comments, the ability to use the get request to be able to actually retrieve it from the database, and the ability to make our own posts and comments using the post request. Also, we're going to do something called routing, which is going to allow us to switch between components. So being able to switch between a profile and a feed page and other pages to come. So let's get started. If you can all type npm run hotloader to actually get this website up, it should say something like cat happiness and be able to click on it and adding state. And in the browser, head to the localhost 5050, and it should look something very much like Workshop 2. So yeah, so please run npm hotloader. I'll give us maybe like 10 seconds for us to get the hotloader running. Do you need help, please? Join the question stock, join the queue. Did someone ask a question? Oh, it should be W3 starter. Yeah, so please ignore that. It's W3 starter on the top right over there. Okay, I think that is enough time. So as a warm-up, currently in app.js, we see the cat happiness profile page. And we want to say, instead of rendering this profile page, I want to render something new called the feed page, which is in the pages folder down here. So as a warm-up for everyone, please import feed.js into app.js and render the feed instead of the profile. And it should say something like that instead of the profile page. I'll give us about a minute to try that. Okay, hopefully that is approximately enough time to do that. If not, then it's absolutely okay because I will be doing it with you guys. So first at the top, we're going to do import feed. And when we import feed, we have to keep in track of where exactly are we in app.js. So the parent folder of app.js is, it looks like it is the components folder. So currently we are in the components folder, and from the components folder, we want to go into the pages folder. And within the pages folder, we can find feed.js. So that is exactly the file path at which we want to render app.js. So at the top, you import feed from the file path up here. And instead of a profile, we can comment this out real quick. And instead of profile, we want to render feed. So hopefully what it looks like is something like this. This is the feed. I'll give us a little bit of time to catch up if we need. But if you got stuck, you should say W3. So please do get reset hard and check out W3 step 1. I'm really sorry it says W1. So, following along for step 1, we are going to try to actually render the stories. So the agenda for step 1 is we're going to get all of the declare a state for us to keep track of all the stories that we have and use a use effect and a get request to actually get all the stories together. And render a list of stories for us. So please get reset hard and get check out W3 step 1. So the first thing that we are going to do is in feed.js, we are going to define the state that holds our stories. So we're going to do, hopefully this is a little familiar, we're going to do const, and then we're going to have a variable name to hold our stories, such as stories, and a setter function to set our stories, which is something like set stories. And we're going to set it equal to the use state hook. And to hold our stories, naturally, because we're holding a list of objects, we want to use an array. And initially, we're going to have an empty array. So the default value for use state, we're going to hold an empty array. Now, something that I'm going to first show you something not to do. So do not do this. What we don't want to do is we don't want to declare the stories variable as getting the stories variables first. And then do set stories to the stories. Does anyone have a guess on why we cannot do this? Like what may go wrong? Any guesses? Any guesses? You need the set function? Okay. Yeah, exactly. So this actually is a promise. And something, not only is it a promise, we have no guarantee that it's going to get back in time. We have no guarantee that line 16 is going to finish, and then set stories is going to execute. Both this, line 16, and here on line 18 are asynchronous functions. So we have no guarantee of which one is going to finish first. So what we do instead is we just get it directly. So we call the get function to make a get request. And then we use the .then and enter the callback function. So the .then guarantees that asynchronous function is going to actually run in a sequence, because instead of having no guarantee, we're going to enforce a guarantee. And within the callback function of the .then, we're going to create a parameter such as a story object we're going to get back. And then within here, we can actually do the setting of our stories. So this is going to be story objects plural. And then we could do something like set stories. And the story objects that we're going to do. So the set stories is going to take the stories object we get from the get request and set it to our actual stories. Now what we can do is actually try to render this. But in order to render it, remember that when we have the get request, what this backend returns is some type of JavaScript garbage, and it's actually not a string, and we have to render it somehow. So we're going to use a new function called JSON.stringify, and then the stories state. So what JSON.stringify does is it takes your garbage JSON object and converts it into a renderable string for us to see. Can people see that? Is that better? All right, okay. Feel free to pause me if things don't look clear. So hopefully what we have here is, oh, whoa, there is a lot of random posts that are here. But we just rendered an array of all of the posts in JavaScript form that we have written as a string so that it can be rendered. So I'll give us a little bit to copy this down before moving on to the next section. Yeah. So If you are done with this, I'll leave this up for a little bit more. Do git reset dash dash hard and go to W3 step 2. So in step 2, what we're going to do is finally have a story properly rendered instead of just a janky JavaScript object. So in feed.js, this is your turn. Try it yourself. Import story.js into your feed folder, your feed file, and try rendering a single story component and passing in a dummy name and a context. So, whoops. Yeah, so I'll give us about 4 minutes to try to attempt this ourselves. If you're lost, don't worry. You can always press the git reset hard button and then go to W3 step 2. Okay, and let's start hopefully wrapping up. No worries if you're not finished because we can go over it together. First thing that we have to do to actually render the single story component is to import the single story component. And something to notice is that the single story component here, I don't know if you can see it now, the single story component is in a different folder than our feed.js. So what we have to do is we have to go back out one folder and then go back into the modules folder to find single story.js. So to import single story, dot dot means to go back to the parent folder. And the parent folder can actually see the modules folder. And within the modules folder, you can finally import the single story. Now we can actually render it. So maybe we don't we don't need our garbage JSON stringify a bunch of stories anymore. And we can try to do is render a single story object. But before we render it, something to note is that within the single story, we first want to check what props it has. The props that it has is creator name and content. Props are the things that we can pass into the child component. So creator name, content, let's remember that they're both strings. So when we do single story, we want to pass in a creator name. I'm going to, for me, say myself. And then I'm going to pass in some sort of content, such as this is a post. Yay. And let's see if it rendered. It didn't exactly render, but let's see why. We see that in the single story.js, we don't actually do anything with our props. First thing to note is that the props are actually not there. We actually have to pass it in as a parameter. Second thing is that we have to render the props that are given down to the single story. So maybe something like props.creatorName and also props.content. Now, hopefully, if we save that, I'll give us some time to type this first. So props.creatorName, props.content, and passing the prop as a parameter to the single story. And hopefully, once we have done that, we can see that a story is written. There's me, and then there is this is a post. Does anyone need to see the feed.js file? Or are we, okay. So I'll spend some more time on this folder, this file, and then I'll go back to feed.js. Hopefully people are wrapping this down. So in feed.js, we can see that we loaded the single story component. We specify creator name to pass in, me, and we specify content to pass in. This is the post. Up here, we just imported it so that we would actually be able to use this. So, no worries if you are a little lost, but we can try to make our stories a little bit prettier. So, feel free to use the CSS that we have. I'll give us, we're running a little long time, so maybe just 30 seconds to try and mess around the CSS and the divs and see what you can do. Hopefully it looks something kind of like this. Okay, that is not enough time to do it, but that's okay because I will do it with you guys. So we see that in our rendering, it's displayed side by side. And to try to fix that problem, we can try first creating two separate divs, one for the creator name and one for the content. So we can put the creator name in one of the divs and the content in the other div. Now what we can do is just specify the CSS class that we want for each one. So in the creator name div, I can use something like ubold because it is actually bolded in our demo there. So class name, remember we use class name instead of class because we are a JSX. So ubold. And then for this one, you can use card story content. So I'll give us a little bit of time to copy that down if you want. And okay, and we can see that now there is a bolded creator name, and now there is some post. It doesn't look exactly like that, but it's okay because we always have more time to mess around CSS later. Next, we want to actually be able to take our feed and render it into multiple stories. So now we have the ability to render a single story onto our page. And we also have the ability to get all of that, like fetch all of the stories that the database has and fetch it back to us. Now what we want to do is combine the two together. How do we actually get all the stories that we retrieve and load it into all the stories that we want to render? So if you want to follow along, In p.js, what we're going to do is going to input our state and single story together. And we want to convert this object array, an array of objects, into some type of a bunch of components. So let's guess what we're trying to do. What function are we going to try to use? Guess it. Yeah, we're going to use map. So let's review the map function. This map function takes an array and it takes a callback function and it applies that function to every single item in the array. So for this example, we're going to have some array of JavaScript objects. And what map is going to do, we take a function that we give it, a callback function, and it's going to call it on every single one of those things to create something new. We're going to turn something that React is unable to enter into something that is actually kind of pretty. So to follow along, we're going to put it together, and you can follow along with me. You can do get reset -hard and get checkout W3. This is step 3, and follow along. Oops. So instead of rendering a single story, what we're going to do is we want to go into JavaScript. And remember, to first in our GSX environment, to go into the JavaScript environment, we want to have 2 curly braces. And the initial array that we're trying to convert is the array of JavaScript objects that contain our stories. So first we're going to do, we see it's stored in our state as stories, we're going to do stories.map. And then within story.map, we're going to ask, what do we want to do to every one of those stories? So we do a callback function that says we take one of those story objects. And what it's going to do is it's going to render some type of single story that's associated with it. And for each one of these story objects, they're going to have a creator name and some type of content. So, and that's exactly what we want to pass into our props. So we're going to say creator name is equal to, and we want to say story object dot creator name. And then for the content, we're going to say story object dot content. And hopefully this renders, but I don't think it will. I'll give this some time to catch up if we need it. Yeah, so this actually isn't going to end up rendering anything, because what we have is we have a function that does something but doesn't return it. So we would actually have to say return. Oh, whoa, look, it's all of our things that we wanted to load, and it looks so pretty with the content names and the creator. Remember, when you use curly braces here, it is a function body. It needs a return statement. But if you use parentheses instead of the curly braces, then there is something called an implicit return, where the return statement is just implicitly there. I think I'm missing. Okay, there you go. So if you don't want to put the return statement and your function is super simple, then you can just render dirt like that, and the return statement is just there by default. Should we do the next one? So I'll give us some time to catch up with this. And I might go like 2 minutes overtime. And are we ready to move on? All right, okay, we're ready to move on. If you are not ready to move on, don't worry, this is really fast. So we can do get reset hard and do the next component, which is, we can just go to the new story. So get checkout W3, step 4. So we're able to fetch all of our stories and be able to render them properly. But what about the ability to post a new story? What do we want to do? So the post endpoint sitting in the backend, it has a specified parameter. It's going to be called content. So follow along with me in step 4 and let's try to make an input file, input area. So in the new post input file, if you follow along with me, new post input, it is in the modules folder. We're going to see a lot of things. First, there is a new post input component, which basically gives you a text input and it's going to give you a button. So, and the props to that is going to be a on-submit function, which is basically saying whenever I click this button, what am I going to do? But we want to be able to reuse this new post input over and over and over again. But maybe we want the on-submit function to do different things. So what we can do is take this input text, where we can type things in, and this button that we press, and we can wrap it in another React component and specify what that function is going to do, what the on-submit is going to do. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to create a new story React component, and it's going to create a function to pass into this new post input. So we have to specify some props, and we have to implement the add story function. So what we want the on-submit to do is we want to post a new story into our database. So we're going to say post, and then the endpoint is going to be that /API/story, and then it's going to do a then. Oh, wait, my mistake. First, before doing that, we want to declare a function to actually do the story. So we're going to do a const new function to add story, and it's going to take in some value, and it's going to do something with it. And what it's going to do is going to post a new story. And what it does is it takes the value that it has. Oh, and also when you have a post method, you can specify a parameter. And remember, the post method asks for a parameter called content, and we're just going to say, here's the value. And I actually don't think you need a .then, because we're not waiting for this to finish actually anything. So now that we have a function that takes in some value and sends it to the database through a post request, now we can actually try to render this input. So what we're going to do is we're going to render new post input and pass in the on-submit function as the add story function. So just to overview, we have I will give us some moment to copy this down. Maybe about 10 seconds or so. Okay, to overview, we have this recyclable component with some text input and a text button. And that component has an on-submit prop that says, when I press this button, what exactly do I do? Since we want it to be reusable, we wrap it inside another component, such as new story. And here we can actually specify what the on-submit is going to do. So we're going to make a function that says, I'm going to take some value, and I'm going to send it to the backend as some type of content to upload. And then I can actually render it with the on-submit button as on-story function. So hopefully we have that rendered. And in feed.js, be sure to import it. And have it here for us to use. So now we have it here, and hopefully now that we can type something, and press submit and refresh the page. Okay, something went wrong, but if you story value, but we are out of time. So if you want the fully working code, please check out the step 5. Otherwise, we have some announcements for us.
All right, so thank you everyone for sticking around. I'm gonna run a little bit over. Please give us feedback on how you felt today went, or how you felt yesterday went if you didn't fill it out. Yes, if you could take some time to do that now, that would be great. And I will just keep rolling with the announcements. Very, very important. Milestone 0 is due tonight. Make sure to make your teams, set up your teams on the portal, lock your teams, and submit your 10 ideas. If you have any issues doing any of that, please post on Piazza or come to office hours tonight. Also, if you want a field box that does not, like any random box that don't fit into the feedback form, let us know on Milk and Cookies. And we also have a special thing for today, that is we have an optional homework that will help you get a little bit more practice with Reacts. I think it's really fun, highly recommend. So you can check it out on weblab.in/home. And then also we have our lecture recordings live on YouTube, on that link there. If any of them are hard to use because we've been kind of struggling with the like video recording stuff. So in a couple of them, like Git and JS, you can't really see the board. So if you would benefit from having lecture recordings, like having better recordings for any of those, let us know on Milk and Cookies, and we might be able to just re-record some parts of the lectures for you guys. And also, if any of you guys were having trouble following the Figma workshop from yesterday, Joyce made a nice little video of it last night. Shout out to Joyce, she's amazing. And there's a special weblab that is linked for that. Come to office hours tonight if you're confused on anything from 7 to 9 p.m. And also you can just like stay here and ask us your questions as an informal office hours of sorts. Cool, thank you all. I'm so sorry. There was a